U.S. President Donald Trump dumped the Iran nuclear deal on Tuesday, triggering concerns of unrest in the Middle East and U.S. isolationism. How are world leaders reacting and what's next for the derailed deal? And Moscow held its 2018 Victory Day parade Wednesday. And with the slashed defense budget, how is Putin balancing Russia's international role with challenges at home as he starts his fourth term? Welcome to The Point. I'm Chen Lei, sitting in for Liu Xin. U.S. President Donald Trump announced his decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal on Tuesday. He added that the U.S. will start tough new sanctions on Tehran and that any country that helps Iran obtain nuclear weapons would also be sanctioned. Critics say the announcement could have alarming consequences, including an escalated arms race in the Middle East, disrupted oil markets, and strained relations between the U.S. and some of its closest allies. So what are the immediate ramifications and what long-term consequences can we expect after the dust settles? What does pulling out of one more international agreement say about the U.S.'s credibility and international leadership? Joining me for today's discussion are Raymond Tanter, Professor Emeritus at the University of Michigan and former official at the National Security Council in the Reagan-Bush administration. Joining us from Washington, D.C., and Mayor Javed Danfar, a Middle East analyst based in Tel Aviv. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. So let me start by asking you, Professor Tanter, what were the reasons for Trump to pull out of this deal, which he described as horrible and one-sided?
The reason that President Trump pulled out is because the deal is not good. It's not a good deal. And the ramification, why do I say it's not a good deal? President Obama front-loaded the sanctions relief, so Iran got all of the money, so the United States then lost leverage over Iran. And I would say that the only leverage that can be used now, that the United States has pulled out, is to support Iranian opposition groups like the National Council of Resistance of Iran in order to put pressure on the Iranian regime so that it then wants to renegotiate the deal pursuant with what the Europeans want, if not China and Russia.
So, obviously Trump has his reasons. What do you make of them, Mayor?
Well, with the tremendous respect that I have for Professor Raymond Tanter, I have to disagree with him. I think it was the wrong decision. I think President Trump did it in order to basically fulfill his election campaign, but I think in terms of the long-term ramifications, it's the wrong decision. First of all, the money that Iran got was its own money in return for mothballing the heavy water reactor in the city of Arak, and also for limiting the number of centrifuges and for shipping out 98% of its low-enriched uranium stockpile and agreeing to the most intrusive inspections any NPT country is under. It's an interesting fact that politicians don't tell the public that in between all the countries that are members of the NPT, because of the Iran nuclear deal, Iran is the most inspected nuclear country. And so President Trump has now put that at risk. You could say that there were problems with the deal, that you were not happy, people are not happy about it. That's very natural. But to go out and to pull out of the deal, I think it was done short-sightedly. And I think despite the fact that in Israel there's concern about Iran's actions in Syria and its missile program, I think this is going to actually undermine the leverage of the Americans when it comes to Iran, because reaching another deal with Iran will now become much more difficult after America walked out of a deal which, according to all accounts, Iran was keeping and abiding to.
Right, so obviously we have a disagreement on there. What about the fact that this may be undermining the international credibility of the U.S., and how will it influence Trump's upcoming meeting with DPRK leader Kim Jong Un? Mr. Tanter?
Yes. My view, and I have utmost respect for my colleague, is that the credibility of the United States increases as a result of being tough on Iran. Kim Jong Un is more likely to abide by any agreement with the United States. Why do I say that? Kim Jong Un has been sending his intelligence people, but also scholars into the United States to interview think tank people like myself in order to find out what President Trump was going to do. In other words, it's like a game of chicken where two cars are coming toward one another. One driver throws his steering wheel out the window. The other driver has no choice but to swerve. Kim Jong Un has swerved. Now, with respect to the military sites, possible military sites, are potential places where enrichment has been going on and where miniaturization of warheads designs have been going on. You need a delivery system, you need a warhead, and you need enriched uranium or plutonium type bomb. And North Korea and Iran are partners in proliferation, so what you have to do is to break that link between the two, and you have to put pressure on the Iranian regime through Iranian protest groups. There are no protest groups in North Korea, but you have to have credible threats against North Korea, and that's what I think pulling out of the Iran deal does for President Trump.
But, Mr. Javadhanpur, don't you think this actually gives the hardliners in Iran more reason to revive the enrichment, to build nuclear weapons?
Well, I don't know about building nuclear weapons, but I'm worried that the hardliners in Iran now can basically isolate President Rouhani, who was already isolated. I mean, they made life already difficult for him. Now he could become even more toothless. And, you know, there's some concern also that he could be the last civilian president of the Islamic Republic of Iran. In Iranian press, you read more and more that, you know, it's, again, it's not a prevalent discourse, but for the first time, I'm reading articles that some of the hardliners are saying, well, we should have a military president now. You know, these presidential elections don't serve our interests. And I think they're going to become emboldened, at least in the short term, because all along they've been saying that reaching a deal with America, you can't trust the Americans because they don't abide by an agreement. And President Trump has basically proved them right. And this is a major problem. And I think when it comes to North Korea, you have to, where I disagree is that one of the reasons why America was successful against North Korea was because it had a coalition which included China. The North Koreans saw that China supports America's position more or less in terms of wanting to confront, and also Japan. In Iran, America does not have the support of China. America does not have the support of Russia. America does not have the support of Europe. And I think, so this is, I think, one of the major differences. I think another difference is if you're sitting in Pyongyang, after what happened now to Iran, you would be worried that, hang on, if I reach a deal with President Trump, who says that the next president is not going to walk out of it just like President Trump did? I think as much as I can see similarities, but there are stark differences between the two cases. And I think actually what happened to Iran could also be a warning light to the North Koreans for any eventual agreements.
Mr. Tanter, you seem fairly sanguine about the possibility of escalated conflict in the region as a result of this.
No, I don't believe, well, I do believe there's more tension in the Middle East, but that tension is canceled out in a sense by lowering tensions in East Asia with some kind of possible détente reached between North Korea and the United States. I still say that, and I also say that the distinction between hardliners and softliners is not a distinction without a difference. That is to say, Rouhani is thought of as a hardliner, and the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, is thought of as a hardliner. Yes, a hardliner. But Rouhani was elected in part by the Iranian opposition group called the National Council of Resistance of Iran, that tilted its votes in favor of Rouhani against a hardliner supposed person, the mayor of Tehran. So I say that Rouhani is part of the problem, and I don't see any real difference between Rouhani and Ali Khamenei. And the same is true with respect to Zarif, the foreign minister. They are all part of the same ball game.
Okay,
and
so you
possible military dimensions.
Right, let's talk about international
And the last
relations.
point is that...
Yep. Make your last point.
Yes. The military sites. Some of the military sites are off limits for international inspectors. The fact that the International Atomic Energy Agency is launching the most, as my colleague says, the most intrusive inspections ever, Iran still has the right to prohibit the IAEA inspectors from going into military sites. That is unacceptable.
That wasn't part of the deal, but I'm going to move on. Mr. Javadanfar, you know, we've got leaders of France, Germany and the UK not being able to persuade Trump. Does this mean Europe is losing influence with the US? And what does all this mean with, you know, I guess, Russia? And also, is it good news for Saudi Arabia and Israel?
First of all, I have to state a very important factor to Professor Tanter. If you read the JCPOA, there is access given to military sites. It could take a total of 24 days, but if Iran has been making a nuclear weapon using enriched uranium, which is what you will need, the half-life of enriched uranium is 300 million years. So 24 days is nothing in terms of finding traces of enriched uranium. Now, so the military sites are part of the deal. Especially after the nuclear deal, there has not been any case where IAEA has wanted to reach a military site after the deal, and Iran has said no. Let's talk about the broader
ramifications.
Yes.
Yes. Relations between Israel and its neighbors, relations between the US
You're right, it's post-mortem. You're right. Sorry, we're talking about a dead subject here. That's the Iran deal. There's no point crying over spilt milk. Israel, I think, is going to use this opportunity to push Iran in Syria. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, one of the reasons why he supported the end of the nuclear deal is because he wants to weaken Iran, because he believes the weaker the Iranian economy is, the weaker its support for Bashar al-Assad will be, so the more Israel can push Iran away from the border with Syria, and also the Saudis for the same reason. Saudi press was celebrating today. I've had Arabic-speaking friends tell me, absolutely celebrating that the deal is ended, because the Saudis believe that Iranian money and Iranian support is the reason why the Houthis have been attacking them and firing on them, and they're very happy. So I think these countries today they feel that a weakened Iranian economy means a weakened Iranian presence abroad equals more security for them.
Professor Tanter, what about the US and its allies, the European allies that it used to be so close to? What does this do to the relationship?
Well, France's Macron and Germany's Angela Merkel both came. They are still close. And the Treasury Department issued new sanctions, these secondary sanctions, which will which will raise the tensions between France and among France and the United States, between France and the United States, between the United Kingdom and the United States. But I don't think the Allies, if they have a choice, will choose Iran over the United States. The international banking system, the New York banks, and the banks in London and Paris cooperate very closely together, and you're not going to choose. The American economy is something like $15–16 trillion. Iran is a minuscule country compared to Iran.
Obviously, there's going to be some
would
hesitancy in dealing with the U.S. in the future.
Not with France and the United States. These are allies of the United States. They're part of NATO. The United States is a bulwark of the Atlantic Alliance, and you cannot lose the United States as an ally, irrespective of whether it's President Obama, President Clinton, or President Trump. So, and it's very important that the Saudis stay on board as well. I've been to Saudi Arabia. I've spoken with Prince Turki Al Faisal, and of course he's delighted. Iranian money is funding the Houthis, the slaughtering in Yemen. I've been to Yemen, and I see the poke marks. So I disagree with my colleague on this point.
Okay. And on that note, we're going to wrap up the discussion. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. Raymond Tanter, Professor of Political Science at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and Mayor Javadanfa, Middle East analyst based in Tel Aviv. Obviously, hopes are for enduring peace in whatever region around the world. Welcome back to The Point. I'm Chen Lei. Russia's 2018 Victory Day parade marched into Moscow's Red Square on Wednesday to commemorate the 73rd anniversary of Nazi Germany's defeat. Just 2 days after Vladimir Putin was sworn in for his fourth presidential term, this year's parade featured plenty of military pageantry as expected, but Putin's government actually cut military spending by as much as 20% last year. That's the first reduction in 2 decades. What do these cuts mean for Russia's military? And in the wake of developments in Iran and Syria, how will Russia balance its international role with responsibilities at home? Joining me are Vladimir Goldstein, Professor of Slavic Studies at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and Yuri Barman, Fellow from the Russian International Affairs Council in Moscow. Welcome, gentlemen. So let me start by asking you, Yuri, what was significant about this year's parade, and has Russia really cut its military budget by that much?
Well, look, every year we have this military parade on May 9th, so symbolically, obviously, it's hugely important, and every year Russia, gets an opportunity to showcase its newest weapons. So, of course, obviously it is directed at the domestic public as a celebration, but also it is a political message to the world community that Russia still, showcases the newest weapons, it's high tech. So Russia is essentially showing that Russia is prepared to take on any struggle. Speaking about the military budget, I think I wouldn't read too much into these cuts. I think that the most sort of logical explanation here is the fact that the most active stage of Russia's military reform has just ended. And Russia has been investing a lot into upgrading its military capabilities. So that has just come to an end, and we're seeing that investment into the military going down a little bit. So it's more of a logical process, and I think that's the explanation as well that the Kremlin came up with, that it's nothing new, it's nothing terrible, it's just that the military reform is going down. It's already concluded.
So, Professor Goldstein, how is Russia balancing demands on its military with those sanctions and, of course, quite a tight budget because it's trying to fix its stagnant economy?
Well, from what we observe, they're doing pretty well. The idea is to become much more efficient, and I think, we know that a lot of industries become leaner and become meaner. And sanctions actually woke up Russians. They realized that they have to rely on themselves. And, we know it's a legacy of the Soviet Union, a lot of wastage, a lot of corruption, a lot of money was siphoned, to private pockets. Now, people are working harder and contributing more, and I think they're balancing very well. So the very fact that they decided to, shrink the budget a little bit, I wouldn't read much into that. And I think, we know from historical, in the last few years that, many industries are actually recovering under the sanctions. So I wouldn't read that much into that. Russians, of course, have to invest more, and they have all the abilities to function on their own without, Western interference.
Now, Yuri, we had a pretty ambitious decree from Vladimir Putin 2 days ago that it's going to become the 5th largest economy by 2024. But to do that, to move up from 12 or 11, it would have to grow at, say, 12% per year. Is that possible? Is that target realistic?
I mean, look, you need to be a prophet, really, to tell if it's possible or not. Obviously, there are lots of economic challenges to Russia, but I think things are looking up for the Russians, I think, at the moment, especially given the fact that the oil is going up again, and that obviously, is a positive thing for the Russian economy. Vladimir Putin has been saying continuously that he is trying to break that resource curse that Russia has at the moment and separate the Russian economy from the oil prices. But for now, the Russian economy, the budget really depends on that oil price. So, the economic growth might pick up again, given the prices that are going up again.
Professor Goldstein, I mean, you saw the numbers as well, and also those, plans to raise living standards, halve poverty, and also invest in human capital. But with the same people in power, with the same kind of policy environment, how is that going to be possible?
Well, on the surface of that, it does look very, possible. But we know that the Russians can rise to the occasion. And we know that there is a tremendous pockets, of economy which can be made more efficient. Of course, there is corruption and there is inefficiency, but Russians, can improve things very rapidly. From sort of exporting, say wheat, from importing wheat, now they're becoming the biggest producers of wheat. This is the richest country in the world. Don't forget it. So they can, one hope that they would rise to the occasion. Your question is correct. Can they do it with the same people? But we know that slowly, the certain laws are improving, and they are supporting smaller businesses. There's more, the bureaucracy is trying to unleash individual energy. And Russians are resourceful and energetic, and if, say, the government and officials and people from the top meet their creativity, then, they can do things. Russia, when it, ended its Soviet period, they were behind in many industrial sort of, computers and things. They were behind. But now they're catching up. So I don't, everything is possible. And I hope that these people who are in charge now, and whom, of course, Putin left, they learn from the mistakes and they will try to meet the demands from the bottom.
Yuri, there was talk from the Deputy Prime Minister about a possible tax hike from 13% to 15%. Are you hearing that?
Excuse me, I didn't catch that.
There's talk of a tax hike in order to broaden the spending.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's again, I think the government has already commented on that. I think that is not on the table at the moment. What is on the table is increasing the retirement age, which might, slightly sort of relieve some of that pressure on the economy. But for now, I think tax is going to remain the same.
Now, let's bring it back to geopolitical matters. Mr. Goldstein, we know that the U.S. is withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal. How does it impact Russia? Because it is involved in so many regional conflicts.
Well, I think it's kind of early to say, but one thing, of course, we already talked about, that prices of oil will go up, and that kind of benefits Russia. Also, it benefits Russia's role of being some kind of mediator, of being somebody who kind of brings parties to the table. So now, in fact, the role of Russia should increase as a country which tries to have friendly relationship with Israel and with Iran and with Syria and many regional players. So I think they will, and Russians shown that they are pretty good in diplomacy. So they would try to play a more active role, and one hopes that eventually they will negotiate with President Trump as well. So I think, there's more possibilities and more opportunities for Russia to show to the world its kind of diplomatic side, its sort of, creative side, its side which, calls for compromises and, multi-polar world rather than sort of, ruling by dictate. So I think Russia sort of should use this opportunity.
Yuri, what about relations between Russia and European Union countries? What needs to happen for those fissures in the ties to recover?
Look, that's a million-dollar question, really. The relations do not seem that kind of good at the moment, and we see a lot of friction, a lot of tension there. Traditional allies in Europe, such as Germany, for example, there's really a lot of pressure on Russia from the Germans as well, but Angela Merkel is coming to Russia very soon, later this month. So you can see how both sides are sort of trying to find common ground. But I have to add, I mean, look, the Iran nuclear deal and now what we're seeing in the geopolitical arena, I think that actually might drive the Europeans and the Russians closer to each other, because now they will have to work together in order to save the Iran deal. So that might actually be a sort of a trust-building measure between the Europeans and the Russians.
So let's talk about China, Professor Goldstein, because Russia has become the biggest energy supplier to China in this new 6-year term. How do you see Putin aligning his relationship with China?
I think the alliance would get stronger and stronger. These two countries have absolutely kind of mutual goals, not only goals in terms of trade and economy and cooperation, but also in terms of their vision of international affairs. Both countries insist on multipolar worlds. Both countries, with their proud history and proud traditions, don't want to be ruled from above, don't want to hear the dictates and bullying and directions from the United States. So I think they have, you know, a lot of things in common, and I don't think they have that many things which will pull them apart. So I think both leaders understand it, and a sign of it is they always sort of exchange visits and increase cooperation. And I think both have this vision of mutually a kind of beneficial relationship rather than sort of what's good for me, you know, it's fine, but, you know, you deal with it. This was a recent sort of American attitude. So I foresee much stronger cooperation and much more, forceful union.
Thank you so much for that discussion. Vladimir Goldstein, Professor of Slavic Studies at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and Yuri Bauman Fellow from the Russian International Affairs Council in Moscow. Thank you for joining us. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Point. You can download the app called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. I'm Chong Wei, sitting in for listening.